The gavel hit the wood and echoed like thunder in my chest. And then he smiled. The judge. He smiled at my wife. It wasn't a professional smile. It was personal, soft, knowing. It lasted less than a second, but it ripped everything inside me apart. I looked at her, hoping to find denial in her eyes, maybe guilt or even shame. But she wouldn't look at me. She stared at the floor like it was more interesting than the moment her husband was being sentenced to be removed from the only country he had known for 2 decades. That silence between us, it screamed louder than any accusation. I remember how my breath froze in my throat, how my hands trembled under the weight of the handcuffs. The metal was cold, but her betrayal was colder. That smile between them, small, almost imperceptible, had the weight of years of lies I hadn't dared to suspect. I wasn't just being deported, I was being erased by a system I had feared all my life, and by a woman I once believed loved me. We had shared a bed. She had made me coffee that morning, said she'd be in court to support me. She wore the necklace I gave her on our 3rd anniversary. Now, it felt like a noose tightening around my neck. Every step I took toward that courtroom felt like I was walking into a fire I didn't know she started. The ICE officers on either side of me were emotionless, mechanical. One of them adjusted my shirt collar before walking me in front of the judge, like I was about to take a family photo instead of losing my entire life. And still, I searched her eyes. I needed her to blink, to cry, to show something, but she just watched the wall. Not once did she flinch. Not once did she open her mouth. Her silence was surgical, precise, deadly. People talk about betrayal like it's a knife, but betrayal isn't sharp at first. It's slow, it's quiet, it waits. And then, when you're weakest, it becomes something you can't survive. And what made it worse, what turned it from pain into agony, was realizing this had been planned, calculated, coordinated. This wasn't a bad decision in a moment of fear. This was a setup. I wasn't naive. I knew the risks of living undocumented. I knew how ICE operated, especially after 2025 when the new administration began sweeping operations across Texas. I watched friends disappear, co-workers vanish after routine traffic stops. But I thought I was careful. I kept my head down. I worked hard. I paid taxes. I sent money back home. I didn't make enemies, or so I thought. The truth is, when you're undocumented, you're invisible until someone decides to see you. And once they do, you're a target, a threat, a number. And that day, I wasn't Emilio, the man who worked 16 hours in a restaurant, who sent every extra dollar to his family in Oaxaca. I was A725493, a number in a file, a line item on a judge's docket, a problem to be removed. And yet, it wasn't ICE that hurt the most. It wasn't even the judge. It was her, my wife, the woman I had trusted everything. The woman who had access to every detail of my life, my name, my schedule, my location, my fear. She had weaponized it all, not out of panic, but for something much colder, something darker. And that moment, when the judge smiled at her before sealing my fate, was when I finally saw the full picture. I had always wondered why she seemed distant lately, why she took calls in the other room, why she deleted messages, why she started locking her phone. I told myself she was stressed, that immigration fears were getting to her too, that she was just tired. But tired doesn't lie. Tired doesn't let you fall alone. Tired doesn't smile back at the man who just ruined your husband's life. So there I was, standing in shackles, staring at the woman who had once cried at our wedding, who had held my hand when my mother died, who had whispered promises in my ear at night. And now she was watching me disappear, and she didn't even blink. People in the courtroom were quiet. There was no outrage, no gasps, because this is routine now. Just another brown man taken away, another undocumented worker processed. The system doesn't care how long you've lived here, how many taxes you've paid, or how much you've sacrificed. It cares about your papers, and I didn't have the right ones. But what no one knew, what even I hadn't realized fully until that moment, was that the betrayal was coming not from the country, but from my own home. I felt my knees wobble as they pulled me away. I didn't look back at her. I couldn't, but I saw her reflection on the glass door as we exited the courtroom. She was already texting someone. Her expression wasn't grief, it wasn't guilt, it was calm, collected, like she had won something. That's when I knew. This wasn't just abandonment. This was a plot, a betrayal deeper than deportation. And as I was loaded into the transport van, I replayed every moment of our last months together. The lies, the distance, the cold shoulder that I had called stress, the fake smiles, the moments she suddenly needed money, and when I said no, her mood would shift like a storm cloud. And then I remembered something, a small detail, a moment I had buried. Months ago, I came home early from a shift. She wasn't expecting me. There was a car parked in front of our house I didn't recognize, a black sedan. When I walked in, she looked surprised, and she lied about being home alone. I brushed it off, told myself not to be paranoid, told myself she deserved privacy, trust. I was wrong. If you've ever felt like someone pulled the ground out from beneath your feet, you know the feeling. It's not falling, it's floating in nothing. That's what it felt like, a life built on sand. And the tide had just come in. And now, I ask you, have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted with your life? Has someone ever looked you in the eye while holding the knife they stabbed you with? Share your story in the comments. You're not alone. Say it loud. My truth matters. And if you believe these stories must be told, subscribe. This is a space for survivors, for voices that refuse to be silenced. My name is Emilio Ortega. I am 42 years old, and until the day the cuffs closed around my wrists, I had lived in the United States for exactly half my life. 21 years building a life most people never saw. A life that never made the news, never made it into statistics, never got recognition, but it was real. It was mine. And every day of it sacrifice I made quietly, hoping it would be enough. I came from Oaxaca, Mexico, not the tourist postcards, but the rural outskirts where children still carry water in buckets and old men walk for hours just to get medicine. I was 21 when I crossed. I didn't tell anyone the exact day I would leave. I just hugged my mother, promised I'd call, and disappeared into the dark with a bag of clothes, a few tortillas wrapped in foil, and a heart full of fear. The kind of fear you don't talk about. The fear that you might die. The fear that you might live and lose everything anyway. The desert doesn't forgive weakness. I walked for 3 nights with a group of 9 people. Only 7 of us made it. One man collapsed from heat stroke on the 2nd day. A woman twisted her ankle on a rock and was left behind. The coyote warned us not to look back. Just keep walking, he said. Looking back makes you hesitate. Hesitating gets you killed. Those words haunted me for years, even after I reached Houston. My first job was washing dishes at a seafood restaurant near the edge of downtown. The shifts were brutal. 14 hours, no breaks, no overtime, paid in cash, and expected to say thank you. I did say thank you. Not because I was grateful, but because I knew the alternative was worse. I shared a 1-bedroom apartment with 6 other men. We rotated on the floor like pieces in a puzzle. Whoever worked the night shift got the bed during the day. Whoever came home early slept closest to the door. Privacy didn't exist. Dignity was a luxury, but we had hope. And sometimes, hope is enough to keep a man breathing. Every month, I sent money home. At first, it was just $50 or $60. Then, as I picked up more jobs, I managed to send $200, then $3. I would go to the money transfer place, count every dollar 3 times, and write my mother's name slowly in the form, afraid I'd misspell it and lose everything. I never did. And every time I sent that money, imagined my little sister buying notebooks for school. I imagined my father buying insulin. I imagined my family eating meat that week instead of just beans and rice. That imagination kept me alive. I learned English 1 word at a time. Fork, table, bus, tip, clock in, break time. At first, I was scared to speak. I was afraid of sounding stupid. But one day, a customer asked me for hot sauce and I replied, "Yes, right now," without hesitation. That night, I cried. Not because of the sentence, but because I had finally spoken without fear. That's something no one tells you. That language isn't just communication, it's power. And every time you learn a new word, you reclaim a piece of yourself. Eventually, I got a better job at an Italian restaurant called Marco's. Marco, the owner, was an old immigrant himself, from Sicily. He understood things most people didn't. He never asked about papers. He cared about effort, punctuality, respect. I gave him all 3. In 15 years, I missed a day. I showed up in hurricanes, in floods, in heat waves that melted shoes to the pavement. I showed up with the flu. I showed up when my mother was dying and I couldn't fly home to see her. That's the thing about being undocumented. Grief becomes private, invisible. You mourn in silence because you don't have the luxury to fall apart. I remember my first raise. Marco called me into his office. I thought I was being fired. My hands shook, but he smiled and said, "You've earned more than minimum wage for years. It's time." I nodded. I couldn't speak. He added $100 to my weekly pay. I used that money to rent a room alone for the first time. A room, not an apartment, just a room. But it had a door that locked and a bed that was mine. I cried the first night, not out of sadness, but out of peace. I sent pictures of that room to my sister. Her reply was short. "Nice. Alejandro needs shoes. Can you send a bit more this month?" There were no congratulations, no questions about how I felt. Just another request, another expectation. But I said yes, because I always said yes. Because guilt is the leash that pulls us back home, even when home never reaches forward. Over time, I helped Alejandro through college. Then Lucia, our youngest niece. I paid for books, rent, medical bills. I fixed the roof on my parents' house twice. I sent money when the dog got sick. I sent money when my sister lost her job. I sent money on birthdays, on Christmas, on any day. In the letter, that why. And every time I told myself, it's what family does. But family never asked how I was doing. They never asked what my dreams were, only what I could offer. I had dreams once. I wanted to open a small taqueria, nothing fancy, just a place where I could serve the recipes my grandmother taught me. I even had a notebook with menu ideas: tacos al pastor, mole rojo, caldo de pollo. I would sketch logos during my lunch breaks. It felt foolish sometimes, like writing tales fairy in the middle of a war zone. But those sketches were sacred. They reminded me that I was more than just a worker. I was a man, a dreamer, a builder of futures. But dreams cost time, and time, in my life, belonged to everyone else. My hands were never mine. They belonged to the kitchen, to the packages, to the money wires. My back ached every night. My fingers were stained from chili peppers and dish soap. I didn't have savings. I didn't have insurance. I had duty. And duty, when twisted enough times, becomes a prison disguised as love. There were nights when I would walk home under the streetlights and wonder if anyone really saw me, if anyone would remember me if I vanished. And now, looking back, I realize they wouldn't have, because I had become a ghost in my own life. Present, useful, but never fully there. If you've ever felt invisible in a place where you gave everything, I want to hear your story. Leave a comment and share where you're watching from. Your truth deserves space. And if these stories speak to your heart, subscribe. Because this is more than just a video. It's a voice for all of us who were never supposed to be seen. The day of my first court appearance felt like stepping into a dream I could not wake up from. Not a dream like hope or escape, but the kind that makes your stomach twist. The kind where everything is familiar and wrong at the same time. I arrived wearing the only collared shirt I owned. My hands were sweating, but I kept wiping them on my pants to look composed. My wife was already there, seated quietly on the right side of the room, clutching her purse, like it contained something more important than our life together. As soon as I entered the room, something shifted in the air. I saw her glance toward the judge's bench before she even looked at me, and when her eyes finally met mine, it wasn't relief or warmth I saw. It was avoidance. She looked away so fast, I felt like I had just witnessed something forbidden. I told myself she was just nervous, that maybe she couldn't handle the intensity of the moment. But a voice deep inside me said, "No, this is different." The judge walked in seconds later. He was tall, clean-cut, with silver hair and a face that tried to look neutral but didn't quite succeed. When he sat down and scanned the courtroom, his eyes paused on her, just for a moment, just long enough. That look, that single glance, it wasn't curiosity, it wasn't protocol, it was recognition. And then came the smile. Not big, not theatrical, just a slight curl of the lips, a softness that had no business being in a courtroom, a softness I knew, the same softness she used to give me when we first started dating. He smiled at her like he knew her, like they shared something I wasn't part of. And she, sitting there in her plain blue dress and nervous hands, didn't return the smile, but she didn't flinch either. She didn't look surprised. That told me more than anything else. I remember standing there, heart racing, as the judge read through my file. My name, my country of origin, the date I crossed the border, the years I had lived in the shadows. Every word he said felt like a nail in my coffin. But what hit me harder than his words was the way he occasionally looked toward her. Subtle, controlled, but it was there. He would pause, as if checking her expression, like he wanted her approval, or maybe reassurance. Either way, it wasn't right. At one point, I turned to look at her again. Was perfect. Her, too perfect. Like someone performing a role. Her legs crossed gently, hands folded over her purse, eyes not blinking enough. She wasn't just nervous. She was focused, present, but distant, as if she was waiting for a moment she already knew was coming. There was a moment when the court clerk brought over some documents for the judge to sign. He nodded, signed, and then looked back at the audience briefly. His eyes landed on her. He adjusted his glasses. Then he looked away. But that flicker of something between them, it was impossible to ignore now. My pulse throbbed in my ears. You have to understand, I wanted to be wrong. Desperately. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, that I was just overwhelmed, that fear was clouding my judgment. But fear sharpens some things too. It makes you see what you've been trying not to see. The session ended quickly, too quickly. I didn't even get to speak. My attorney made a brief argument. The judge didn't ask many questions. He didn't need to. It was as if the outcome had already been decided before I even stepped into the room. My wife stood up the moment the gavel hit. She didn't look back, just walked straight out. And the judge, he watched her go. As the bailiff guided me out of the courtroom, I turned back one last time. And in that moment, I caught it. The judge lowered his eyes, not toward his papers, but toward the floor where her footsteps had just disappeared. That was when I knew. This wasn't just immigration. Law. This was personal. That night, I could not sleep. Not because of the possibility of deportation. I had lived with that fear for years. But because the woman I had trusted, the woman who shared my home, my secrets, my bed, had looked at me like a stranger while exchanging silent glances with the man who now held my future in his hands. I replayed every second of that courtroom in my mind. The smiles, the silences, the body language, her phone calls late at night, the times she said she needed space, the way she never asked how I was feeling anymore. The pieces were starting to come together, and they were cutting into me like broken glass. I remembered one night, 2 months before this hearing, she had come home late from a work dinner. Her hair was done differently. She smelled like perfume she didn't own. She said she had gone with some co-workers to celebrate a promotion, but there was no celebration in her eyes. She undressed quietly and slipped into bed without touching me. I asked her if everything was okay. She said yes and turned to face the wall. Another time, I came home early from the restaurant. She was on the phone in the kitchen, speaking in a low voice. When she saw me, she jumped. "Just a friend from college," she said. But the name she muttered, Brian, I had never heard before. I never met a Brian in her life. And now, looking back at the judge's nameplate on the bench, Brian H. Wilson, I felt my stomach twist in ways it never had before. These details felt small back then, too small to make accusations, but now they formed a pattern I had refused to see because it meant accepting a truth too painful to confront. I still remember the way she acted in the car on the way to that hearing, silent, distant, like a cab driver taking a fare to the airport. I had tried to hold her hand. She had pulled away gently and said she was just nervous. She stared out the window the entire ride. When I told her I was scared, that I didn't know what would happen, she nodded but didn't speak. There was no comfort in her touch, no fire in her eyes, just cold, rehearsed patience. In the days that followed, I started paying attention to her phone habits. She guarded it like it was her child. It never left her hand. She had changed her lock screen, stopped syncing messages to the home computer. I asked if everything was all right. She said yes, but her yes sounded like a door slamming shut. It is strange how love blinds us, how we convince ourselves that loyalty means silence, that asking questions makes us ungrateful. I thought I was being respectful. I thought I was trusting her, but I was giving her a shield, and she was using it to protect someone else. If you have ever felt something in your gut telling you that things are not right, listen to it. Your instincts are not paranoia. They are memory, survival. Intuition trying to protect what your heart refuses to accept. If you know what that feels like, share your story in the comments. Let others know they are not imagining things. And if this story reflects even a part of your own, consider subscribing, because here, no one has to question the truth they carry inside. It started with a phone call, not from her, not from the government, but from Marco, my boss of 15 years. His voice was different that day, shaky, like he was holding something heavy in his throat. He said he needed to see me in person, that it couldn't wait. I walked the 6 blocks to the UN restaurant with a knot growing tighter inside me. The same kitchen I had cleaned, the same stove I had stood in front of thousands of hours, now felt like a crime scene before I even stepped through the back door. Marco took me into his office, a small room with a broken fan and a dusty window that never opened all the way. He closed the door gently, looked me in the eyes, and said, "They called." I didn't need to ask who. When you live undocumented, they always means the same thing. ICE, immigration, the faceless system we whisper about but try to outrun with hard work and silence. He said someone had reported me, a formal complaint, detailed, precise, my full name, my birth date, the exact date I crossed the border back in 2005, my address, my work schedule, even what color apron I usually wore in the kitchen. It was not a guess. It was someone who knew me, knew my life, knew where I hid. Marco's voice cracked when he said he was sorry, but he had to let me go. Not because but because they might come for him too. The law punishes anyone who hires people like me, and he was risking everything just by warning me ahead of time. I told him I understood, and I did. He handed me an envelope with 2 weeks of pay and a little extra cash. He told me to lay low, to be smart. Then he hugged me, tighter than any family member ever had. I walked out into the Houston heat, the sun blazing down like it was trying to burn away the last pieces of the life I had built. I didn't go home right away. I walked, just walked, through side streets and alleys, past parks and grocery stores I used to go to without thinking. Every stranger's glance felt heavier now. Every police siren in the distance made me flinch. I replayed Marco's words in my head. Someone reported me, but who? Who would know all those details? Who would want me gone? For the first few hours, I considered the usual suspects. A coworker, maybe, a jealous neighbor, someone who hated the way I parked my car. But the truth was in the precision. It wasn't just someone who knew of me. It was someone who knew me, someone who had access, someone close. That night, I confronted her. I told her what had happened. She acted surprised, shocked, asked all the right questions. "Are you okay? Why would someone do that? What are we going to do?" But something about the way she said "we" felt off, like it was just a word she had rehearsed. Her eyes didn't look afraid. They looked composed. I asked her directly if she knew anything, if she had talked to anyone. She said no, said she would never do something like that. But I noticed something new, defensive sharpness in her voice, her arms crossed, her eyes too steady. Then I remembered the argument we had 2 weeks before. She had asked for money, not a little, $2,000. Said it was for her mother, who needed emergency surgery in Mexico. I told her I would help, but not the full amount right away. That I needed to check my savings. That I was trying to hold on to a little for us, just in case. She had snapped, called me selfish, said I had changed, said I had forgotten where I came from. Then she cried. I apologized, gave her half, and promised the rest as soon as I could. But the next few days, her mood shifted, colder, quieter, like she was waiting for something or hiding something. Now, with Marco's warning in my ears, her behavior didn't feel like a coincidence. It felt like a warning missed. The next morning, I checked the account we shared. The money was gone. Not just the $2,000, almost everything. She had withdrawn it all the day after our argument. Said it was for rent and groceries. But rent wasn't due for another week, and the fridge was still full. I started putting things together. The timeline, the attitude, the sudden secrecy. Her phone was locked now. She took it with her to the bathroom. She had changed all her passwords. She said she was just being careful, but careful was a mask. I remembered something else. 2 months ago, I found a piece of mail addressed to her with a last name I didn't recognize. She said it was a mistake, that it was a mix-up from her old job. But now, I wasn't so sure. Maybe it wasn't a mistake. Maybe it was a name she had never stopped using. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed up going through every memory like flipping through pages in a burned book, looking for something that had been there all along. Something I didn't want to admit. I thought about calling her out again. I thought about asking one more time. But I knew, deep down, I knew. Because when someone loves you, truly loves you, they protect you. They don't sell you. And that is what this was. A sale. A transaction. Someone gave her something she wanted, and in return, she gave them me. To this day, I don't know what her price was. Money, safety, revenge. Maybe all of it, maybe none. But I do know this. Only someone who walks through your front door can point the way to the enemy. When I told Marco what I suspected, he was quiet. Then he said something I'll never forget. It's always the ones who know how to find your fear that know exactly where to stab. So I started preparing, not just to run, but to understand, to dig deeper, to find out how far she went, what she gave them, what they gave her. I started writing everything down, making copies of old messages, photos, bank records. Because if I was going to go down, I wanted the truth to go with me. And now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever trusted someone so completely, only to discover they were building your downfall behind your back? Has someone ever used your love as a weapon against you? Tell me below. Let your truth breathe. No shame, no fear. And if you feel like these stories need to be told, follow this channel. Because silence only protects the ones who hurt us. And here, we speak. The motel room smelled like dust and old air, conditioning. I had chosen the place because it was cheap, cash only, and tucked behind a row of shuttered buildings on the edge of town. It was the kind of place people came to disappear, and that suited me perfectly. I hadn't left the room in 2 days. I barely slept. I sat on the bed with the TV off, lights dimmed, waiting for something I couldn't describe, but somehow knew was coming. The mattress was thin. Springs poked my back if I shifted the wrong way. The walls were yellowed with years of smoke, and the fridge hummed louder than my thoughts. Every sound outside made me flinch. Footsteps, car doors, distant voices. Each one felt like it might be the last thing I heard before everything collapsed. And deep down, I already knew the collapse had started long before I got there. I didn't tell anyone where I was staying. Not Marco. Not even the 1 or 2 people who still asked if I was okay. The world felt smaller now, tighter, like I was suffocating under the weight of my own breath. I didn't eat. I didn't shower. I stared at the motel room door like it was both a wall and a window to the life I was about to lose. Then came the knock. It was soft at first. 2 taps. Polite. Too polite. A second later, a voice. Room service. I froze. This motel didn't offer room service. Another knock. Harder now. The voice shifted. Mr. Ortega, this is the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement. We have a warrant for your detention. Open the door. My stomach fell through the floor. I stood up slowly, legs trembling beneath me. I had always imagined I might get caught one day, but I never imagined it would feel like this. I walked to the door, pressed my forehead against the cool wood, and whispered to myself, "You knew this was coming." I opened the door. There were 4 agents. 2 stood directly in front of me, the other 2 slightly behind, hands on their belts. Their faces were unreadable, trained, not cruel, not kind, just blank. They asked for my name, though they already knew it. They read me a list of my supposed violations: overstayed visa, false documents, unauthorized employment. I didn't argue. I just nodded. They handcuffed me, gently, almost respectfully. One of them even straightened the collar of my shirt like I was heading to church instead of a holding cell. That small gesture, so unnecessary and surreal, broke something inside me. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. I couldn't afford to cry. Not yet. As they walked me out of the I looked back one last time. The motel door swung closed behind me. Just a cheap door in a forgotten building. But it had held my last moments of freedom. It had witnessed my final breath as a man not yet caged. The ride in the ice van was silent. Cold metal walls, no windows, just the sound of tires on asphalt and the occasional burst of radio static. I sat alone on a bench, bolted to the side. My wrists were cuffed to a chain that ran across my waist. I stared at the floor, watched my own shoes, and wondered how long they would stay mine. They took me to a local holding facility first, a processing center, the kind where they strip you of everything. belt, shoelaces, dignity. I stood in line with 10 other men, some younger, some older. One man whispered a prayer in Spanish under his breath the entire time. Another kept saying, "My kids, my kids, my kids," like he was trying to summon them with words alone. When it was my turn, they took my fingerprints, my photo, and handed me a bag with a set of clothes that didn't fit. Pants too big, shirt too thin. They gave me a plastic ID card with a number I still remember, a number that replaced my name in every document from that point forward. They didn't call me Emilio anymore. They called me alien number A08372215. That number followed me everywhere, on the walls, on the folders, on the chain attached to my ankle. It became my identity, my label, my new name in a place where names did not matter. I was moved to a detention facility within 24 hours. It was colder there, bigger, rows of metal bunk beds and harsh fluorescent lights that buzzed day and night. There was no privacy, no quiet, just the sound of men breathing in fear, shuffling, whispering prayers, telling stories about their kids, their jobs, their last good meal. As if saying it out loud kept it real, I was placed in a pod with 36 other men. Most were like me, fathers, workers, men who had not broken any laws except existing
without
in
the
the wrong
right
place. But in that system, that was enough, more than enough. They assigned me a cot in the corner, beneath a flickering light that never fully turned off. The mattress was stained and smelled of bleach. There were no pillows, just a thin sheet and the chill of metal beneath my back. I didn't sleep the first night. I listened. One man cried all night. Another punched the wall until his knuckles bled. A third just stared at the ceiling, eyes wide open, lips moving silently. Everyone dealt with fear in their own way. Mine was silence, stillness. I didn't want anyone to see me fall apart, but I was falling. I thought of my wife, of her last expression, that calm, distant gaze in the courtroom. I wondered if she was sleeping peacefully while I lay on a metal bed with a number around my wrist. I wondered if she had expected this to happen so quickly, if she had arranged it that way. The next morning, they brought us breakfast, powdered eggs, a slice of white bread, lukewarm water. I ate it slowly, not because I was hungry, but because I didn't know when my next meal would come. In that place, time stretches, days blur. You stop counting, you start surviving. We were allowed to make a phone call. I called Marco. He didn't answer the first time. When he finally did, his voice cracked. He asked where I was. I gave him the name of the facility. He said he would try to find a lawyer, that he'd talk to someone, do something. I thanked him. Then I asked him to do one more thing. I told him not to tell her where I was. If you have ever had to protect yourself from someone you once believed would protect you, I want to hear from you. Share your truth in the comments. Let others know that betrayal is not your fault. And if this story resonates with your own pain or silence, subscribe to this channel. This space is here for all the ones who were left behind. Here, we speak the truth others tried to bury. The courtroom door opened, and I walked in feeling like I was carrying the weight of every moment I had ever refused to acknowledge. My palms were sweaty, but I kept them folded in front of me so the judge would not notice. The room smelled of polished wood and stale coffee and fear. My heartbeat felt louder than the whisper of the air conditioning. And then I saw her. She was seated near the back, but visible. And the man on the bench was the judge. The same judge who had looked at me as if I were already gone. The same judge who would now decide if I stayed or left. He began reading the case. He read my name, my country of origin, the date of my arrival, my years of work and sacrifice. Each syllable they uttered felt like a small blow. My tongue felt thick, my throat closed. Inside, a voice screamed that this was wrong. Everything was wrong. Yet all I could do was stand there. The judge's gaze wandered over his papers and then briefly toward her. I caught it, a glance so subtle I almost missed it. He nodded once, as if in silent agreement. And in that point I realized I was not simply being judged for immigration status. I was being judged in a game I never knew I was playing. I tried to think of something to say, something to prove I deserved to stay. I wanted to speak of the years of sending money back home, the nights I cried from exhaustion, the dreams I shelved. But my voice stuck in my throat, and the judge did not ask. He didn't look as though he needed my side. The fix was set. The gears were already turning before I arrived. The sense of inevitability pressed on me. The echo of A08372215 in the room felt louder than all my past efforts. I looked at her again. She wore a calm expression, almost too calm. Her fingers wrapped around the strap of her purse, knuckles white. I remembered the early days of our marriage. Her laugh when I spoke Spanish broken. Her pride when I sent money home. Her hope in my eyes. None of that existed now. Now, she was distant. And he, the judge, was the unseen spectator of it all. Draped in robes, wielding words instead of swords. But the effect was the same. When he finally raised his gavel and struck it, the sound reverberated like thunder in my chest. My heart stopped. The words that came afterwards sounded like they were coming from someone else, describing someone whose life I had watched but did not fully belong to anymore. The decision was swift, the verdict rendered. I was ordered to be deported. And the smile. That smile flickered on his face for just a moment when he looked at her. I saw it, clear as day, and I knew. They led me out. My legs felt numb, my clothes too light, my identity stripped. I walked past the audience, past her sitting there. I did not look at her. I could not. I held my head high, though it felt hollow. The courthouse lobby was bright and cold. Fluorescent lights above me, people talking, cameras of security blinking, but none of them were looking at me. I was invisible. Just another case number. Just another. Deportation. As the transport van pulled away, I saw her reflection in the glass door. She was on the phone. Words I could not hear, but the posture was the same. Controlled, calm, unafraid. It was over. The life I built over 2 decades collapsed in one afternoon, and yet inside me, a spark still glowed. Because though they took the country I lived in, they could not take what I remembered. Not yet. If you have ever felt the line between duty and betrayal blur in one moment, you understand the pain I felt. Share your experience in the comments below. If this story strikes a chord, subscribe and join a community where our voices matter and our truth will not be silenced. Claro, aqui está a parte 6, seguida em sequência pela parte 7, com aprofundamento emocional, narrativa envolvente, em inglês, sem travessões, hífens e com chamadas para a ação ao final de cada parte. Parte 6. The courtroom door opened and I walked in feeling like I was carrying the weight of every moment I had to acknowledge. My palms were sweaty, but I kept them folded in front of me so the judge would not notice. The room smelled of polished wood and stale coffee and fear. My heartbeat felt louder than the whisper of the air conditioning. And then I saw her. She was seated near the back, but visible. And the man on the bench was the judge. The same judge who had looked at me as if I were already gone. The same judge who would now decide if I stayed or left. He began reading the case. He read my name, my country of origin, the date of my arrival, my years of work and sacrifice. Each syllable they uttered felt like a small blow. My tongue felt thick, my throat closed. Inside, a voice screamed that this was wrong. Everything was wrong. Yet all I could do was stand there. The judge's gaze wandered over his papers and then briefly toward her. I caught it. A glance so subtle I almost missed it. He nodded once, as if in silent agreement. And in that point I realized I was not simply being judged for immigration status. I was being judged in a game I never knew I was playing. I tried to think of something to say, something to prove I deserved to stay. I wanted to speak of the years of sending money back home, the nights I cried from exhaustion, the dreams I shelved, but my voice stuck in my throat, and the judge did not ask. He didn't look as though he needed my side. The fix was set. The gears were already turning before I arrived. The sense of inevitability pressed on me. The echo of A083725 in the room felt louder than all my past efforts. I looked at her again. She wore a calm expression, almost too calm. Her fingers wrapped around the strap of her purse, knuckles white. I remembered the early days of our marriage. Her laugh when I spoke Spanish broken. Her pride when I sent money home. Her hope in my eyes. None of that existed now. Now she was distant. And he, the judge, was the unseen spectator of it all. He sat high, draped in robes, instead of wielding words, but the effect was the same. When he finally raised his gavel and struck it, the sound reverberated like thunder in my chest. My heart stopped. The words that came afterwards sounded like they were coming from someone else, describing someone whose life I had watched but did not fully belong to anymore. The decision was swift. The verdict rendered. I was ordered to be deported. And the smile. That smile flickered on his face for just a moment when he looked at her. I saw it, clear as day, and I knew. They led me out. My legs felt numb, my clothes too light, my identity stripped. I walked past the audience, past her sitting there. I did not look at her. I could not. I held my head high, though it felt hollow. The courthouse lobby was bright and cold, fluorescent lights above me, people talking, cameras of security blinking, but none of them were looking at me. I was invisible, just another case number, just another deportation. As the transport van pulled away, her reflection I saw in the glass door. She was on the phone, words I could not hear, but the posture was the same, controlled, calm, unafraid. It was over. The life I built over 2 decades collapsed in one afternoon, and yet inside me, a spark still glowed. Because, though they took the country I lived in, they could not take what I remembered. Not yet. If you have ever felt the line between duty and betrayal blur in one moment, you understand the pain I felt. Share your experience in the comments below. If this story strikes a chord, subscribe and join a community where our voices matter and our truth will not be silenced. Part 7. In the silent movement of the van, I held on to one thought. I must understand this. Why me? Why now? I had always believed in hard work, in being invisible but essential, in doing the right thing so no one could say otherwise. But the truth was, I wasn't being judged by my actions anymore. I was being judged by someone else's agenda, someone who knew me, someone I trusted. The first time I glimpsed her turning away, I thought it was stress. The second time, I accepted the answer. Now I realized the third time she wasn't looking at me at all. She was looking toward him, he who held the gavel. I arrived at the detention center hours later. The fluorescent lights in the hallway made every cell door cast a shadow long and dark. They processed me as they had thousands of others. I was given a number. I was told where to stand, what to remove, what to submit. My history didn't matter. My years of survival didn't matter. The gavel had spoken, and her presence in that courtroom meant that this was personal. Something I couldn't yet prove, but I felt it in every muscle of my back, in every flutter of fear in my chest. That night, I lay awake on the bunk bed. The blanket was thin and rough against my skin. In the darkness, I thought of the first time she had said she loved me, the soft tone of her voice, the way she looked at me. I couldn't place when the shift happened, but I felt it. The warmth left and something colder took its place. A partner became an observer with knowledge of my fear and knowledge of the path. If you know someone close to you looks at the door, not the window, you will understand what I am saying. In the days that followed, I watched her phone habits. I remembered our conversations, her excuses, how she started using a code phrase when I asked about the money meant for her mother's surgery. Code phrases hide secrets. Secrets hide truths. Then I recalled a car I never recognized, a black sedan parked outside. I wrote it down. I remembered the make, the license plate approximation. I started writing everything I saw because memory was my weapon. They could take my work, my freedom, even my name, but not what I knew. I found out he had ruled other cases like mine, quietly. Cases where undocumented workers were deported fast, with no appeal, no fanfare. His record was clean on footnotes. There were patterns of favors, patterns of personal connection, patterns of lives disrupted. I asked my attorney to pull whatever records she could. She found it. Proof linking the judge and her schooling. Proof of vacations taken the same week. Proof of bank transfers. I held it all in a folder, but a folder that meant nothing yet, until someone looked. One afternoon, a guard in the facility dropped a slip of paper near me. At first, I ignored it. Then, I picked it up. It had a name, her name, and another, the judge's. It was a meeting time, a restaurant, no address, just a date. The handwriting was shaky and hurried, as if someone had written it in fear. I folded it and slipped it into my pocket. That piece of paper changed everything inside me, because it proved I was right. Not paranoid, not weak, right. The next step was terrifying. Confrontation. But not yet. First came preparation. I started sending messages to sympathetic attorneys. I called friends they had made in the detention center. I asked questions discreetly. I watched. I listened. And all the time I stored everything I knew in my mind and in the folder. Because to escape, you must first understand the map. If you have ever held silent evidence of someone you love turning stranger, share your story below. Your voice matters, and your truth deserves to be witnessed. If you want to follow this journey with me, subscribe now and let's walk it together with courage and clarity. The call came at night. Not late, but late enough that my heart jumped when I saw Diana's name flashing on the detention center phone. Diana was my wife's cousin, the quiet one, the one people often overlooked. She and I had never been especially close, but there was always a shared understanding between us. She had that kind of gaze that saw more than it said. That night, her voice trembled before she even spoke a word. I held the phone tightly to my ear, my knuckles whitening, every muscle in my body tightening in anticipation. She said, "I need to show you something, but you need to stay calm." No one says that unless what they are about to say is a storm. She told me she had been suspicious for a while. She had noticed things. A message here, a photo left open on a laptop, a strange look exchanged at a family gathering. She never said anything because, like most people in families, she wanted to believe the best. But now, she couldn't stay silent. She had accessed some of my wife's cloud backups. Files that had synced to an old account still linked to a shared email from years ago. My wife had forgotten to disconnect it. In that folder, Diana found screenshots, chat logs, voicemails, and most damning of all, bank transfers. There were messages between my wife and the judge, not just formal ones, personal ones, flirty ones, detailed and time-stamped. They spoke in codes, but some things were too clear to hide. References to court dates, to arrangements, to things taking care of. And in one message, dated 2 days before my court hearing, my wife wrote, "He doesn't suspect anything. It's all set. Once this is over, we're done with him." That single sentence hit harder than the judge's gavel. But Diana didn't stop there. She found a bank statement showing a $10,000 deposit into a joint account under my wife's name. The transfer originated from a private account tied to a law firm the judge was affiliated with before his appointment. The trail was messy, but it was there, enough to make anyone pause. I sat on the phone in stunned silence. My breath caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat. My ears rang. I had to grip the edge of the plastic chair to keep from collapsing. Everything I had doubted, every gut feeling I had tried to bury, every flicker of unease. It was real. I was not crazy. I was not paranoid. She betrayed me. She didn't just walk away from our marriage. She didn't just let the system swallow me whole. She fed it. She dressed it. She led it right to my door. I asked Diana why she was telling me all this now, why she had kept it to herself, and her answer nearly broke me. Because I was scared, and because I thought maybe she had a reason. But now I see she was never scared, just selfish. She promised to send the evidence to my attorney, to the right people. She said, "This isn't just wrong, it's criminal." I thanked her, though the words felt too small for the avalanche of truth she had handed me. After the call, I sat in the corner of the detention cell, lights still flickering, the room full of soft breathing, some snores, some murmurs in dreams. But inside me, the silence had ended. I felt rage, cold and sharp, not the kind that blinds, the kind that clarifies. The next morning, I requested to speak with my attorney immediately. I presented everything: the timeline, the screenshots, the money trail, the phone records, Diana's testimony. I told her about the judge's conduct, the relationship, the conflict of interest so obvious it should have disqualified him from the start. She listened. She took notes. Her hands moved fast, her eyes sharper than ever before. And when I finished, she looked me in the eye and said, "We have grounds, strong grounds. This changes everything." She filed a motion the next day, a motion to vacate the order, to suspend the deportation based on judicial misconduct. The paperwork was thick, full of legal codes, procedural errors, human betrayal disguised as policy, but the foundation was solid, and it was built on truth. A week later, I was informed that the motion had been accepted for review. My deportation was halted temporarily. The fight was not over, but the door that had slammed shut with that gavel had cracked open again, just a little, but enough to breathe. That night, I laid in my bunk and felt something I had not felt in weeks. Vindication. Not freedom. Not yet, but the power of being seen, heard, believed. They thought I would go quietly, that I would accept the shame and disappear, that I would drown in the silence. But they underestimated the strength of someone who has nothing left to lose. They underestimated truth, and they never saw Diana coming. If someone has ever tried to bury your truth or silence your story, leave a comment below. Your voice matters more than you know. And if these words help you breathe a little easier, subscribe. This is not just a channel. It's a place where survivors rebuild themselves, one truth at a time. Waiting was the worst part. Not the confinement, not the chains, not even the shame of wearing the same clothes for days, of eating meals that tasted like paper, of answering to a number instead of my name. The worst part was the silence between updates, the empty space between one court document and the next, the stillness of time when you are clinging to hope so tightly that it bruises your palms. I counted the days, not by the sun, but by the shifts in air around me, by the tone in the guard's voice, by the flicker of light above my bunk. When the motion was filed, there was no celebration, just a nod from my attorney, a faint flicker of hope in her tired eyes. The legal process, she explained, would take time, maybe weeks, maybe months. Time that, in my world, felt like walking barefoot over glass, slowly, painfully, but still moving. Inside the detention center, nothing changed. I was still just one of many, still subject to the routine, roll call, showers, meal lines. But inside my mind, everything had shifted. I began to watch differently, to move differently. I wrote down everything, names, times, conversations. I mapped out the schedule of the guards. I noted when certain visitors came and left. I paid attention to details I once ignored. I had to, because trust was no longer something I could afford. There was one man in my cell block named Raphael. He was older, maybe in his late 50s, a quiet man who prayed every morning and every night. He had been detained for overstaying a visa, but his eyes told a longer story. One day, he sat beside me during lunch and whispered something that chilled my blood. Be careful. Not everyone here is who they say they are. At first, I thought he meant other detainees. Maybe someone was a gang member or had a criminal past. But then he added, some are listening, taking notes, passing things up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake replaying every word I had spoken in the past 2 weeks. Every conversation I had with Diana, with my lawyer, with the guards. Had someone been watching me closer than I realized? The next morning, a guard came to me and said I had a visitor. But it wasn't Diana, and it wasn't my attorney. It was a man in a suit, well-dressed, sharp, too sharp for a public defender or legal aid. He introduced himself as Agent Fletcher from Internal Oversight. He said he was there to talk about my motion, said he wanted to verify some claims. I sat across from him, hands folded, back straight. I answered his questions carefully, but something about him felt off. He didn't ask the right questions, not about the relationship between my wife and the judge, not about the documents or the money trail. Instead, he asked where I got the information, who gave it to me, how I accessed the files, who I talked to. That was when I knew he wasn't there to help me. He was there to find the leak. I gave him nothing, just polite smiles and vague answers. When the conversation ended, he slid his card across the table. On the back, handwritten in small blue ink, was a warning. Someone inside is leaking. Be careful who you trust. The message didn't scare me. It clarified everything. It meant the system was nervous, that someone was watching the watchers, that maybe, just maybe, the truth I carried was heavier than I thought. I spent the next days preparing. I reread every file, reorganized every timeline. I memorized key points in case they took my papers, and I asked my attorney to make duplicates, store backups, upload encrypted files. Then, something strange happened. A guard I barely knew began treating me differently. At first, it was small things. He brought me meals that were hotter than the others, let me stay in the shower a little longer, gave me a few extra minutes on the phone. Then, one night, he sat beside me during rec time and asked, "You think you'll win this thing?" I looked at him carefully. His question wasn't curious. It was tense, like he already knew the answer, but needed to hear me say it. I told him, "I don't know, but I'm going to try." He nodded, then leaned in closer and whispered, "You're getting attention from people you don't want." And then he walked away. That night, I moved my files to a different hiding place. I stopped writing in my journal. I became a shadow inside a shadow, not paranoid, just prepared. Because in a system built to erase you, staying invisible was sometimes your only defense. One morning from my bunk before sunrise. No explanation, no reason. Just told to dress and follow. My hands were cuffed, my feet chained. They led me to a van, but not to court, not to my lawyer. To a private interview room in another building I had never seen. Inside was another suit, another agent, this one older. His badge said Department of Judicial Ethics. He asked for my story, all of it. And this time, I gave it. Every detail, every betrayal, every transfer, every message, exchange, every in the courtroom. He listened in silence. Then, for the first time, someone official said something different. He said, "We believe you." Those 3 words cracked me open. He told me there was already an open investigation into the judge, that my testimony aligned with other claims, that Diana's financial activity had triggered a flag, that someone from the inside was finally paying attention. I asked him what would happen now. He said it was up to the review board, that it could take time. But the process had started. I returned to my cell that day, not as a ghost, but as a witness. Someone they could no longer ignore. I wasn't free. Not yet. But the story was no longer buried. The silence was no longer safe for them. If you have ever been the only voice telling the truth in a room full of lies, I want to hear your story. Drop your experience in the comments. Let your words stand tall. And if these stories speak to the pain you have felt in silence, subscribe now. Here, don't whisper our truth. We give it a voice that echoes. When word spread that the investigation into the judge had officially begun, something shifted in the air around me. It wasn't immediate, it wasn't loud, but it was there, like a current beneath still water. Officers started looking at me differently, not with pity, not with contempt, but with a strange mix of caution and curiosity. I had become something they didn't expect, a case that might actually matter, an immigrant who did not just vanish into silence, a name that refused to be erased. My attorney called it a procedural miracle. Motions that were once buried under paperwork were suddenly being expedited. People who had not returned her emails in weeks were now calling her directly. And though she never said it outright, I knew she was treading carefully too. Because now, this wasn't just about me. This was about the cracks in the very system meant to crush us. Inside the detention center, I remained in the same cell. Bunk, same routine. But every step I took felt heavier with purpose. Men who once avoided eye contact started asking me questions. Quiet ones, careful ones. How did you do it? Who helped you? Can this happen to me? Some told me their stories in hushed tones, trusting me in ways they hadn't before. I became a mirror for their fears and their hope. Because if someone like me could turn the system on its head, maybe there was a way out for them too. I began keeping a small notebook again. This one I kept hidden deep in my mattress. I wrote down every conversation, every observation, every legal term my lawyer mentioned that I didn't understand but needed to learn. I was building something, not just a defense, a map for others to follow, a way to survive with dignity, even behind locked doors. And then came the hearing, not for deportation. This one was different, a closed session to review the motion for judicial misconduct. I wasn't present, but my name was, my case file, my evidence, voice, in the form of signed affidavits, phone transcripts, cloud storage data, and the testimony Diana had provided. It all sat in front of a panel of people with the power to undo what had been done, or at least question it. That day, I sat in my bunk and stared at the wall for hours. I imagined them reading my words. I imagined the judge's face when they brought up the messages. I imagined my wife's expression when she realized the silence she counted on had turned into a storm. A week later, the center director called me to his office. It was rare, unheard of, actually. I sat in a chair that was too soft, facing a man in a suit that didn't match the fluorescent buzz of the building. He looked at me and said, "Your case has been flagged. You are no longer under active removal orders Until the investigation concludes, you'll be held in protective status. No transfers, no proceedings. Effective immediately. I didn't understand every word, but I understood what it meant. They couldn't deport me. Not yet. Not like this. Not while the system that had judged me was now under judgment itself. The next days passed like fog. There was no celebration, no cheering, just quiet, numb relief. I called Marco and told him. His voice broke. He said, "I never stopped believing you." I thanked him and reminded him to keep records of everything, just in case. Because I wasn't done fighting, I also spoke to Diana. She had started working with advocacy groups, people who documented judicial abuse in immigration courts. She was helping translate documents, submit evidence, connect the dots between my case and others. She said she felt like she owed me, but I told her, "No, you don't owe me. You owe the truth, and that is what you gave." One night, I was asked to speak with a journalist. It wasn't official. It wasn't allowed. But the journalist had been digging into my story for weeks. She said she had proof that the judge had handled multiple similar cases over the years, always fast, tracking deportations when his personal connections were involved. She was going to publish a piece, and my name would be in it. She asked for my permission. I paused, then said, yes, because I had lived too long in shadows, too long being careful, being quiet, being invisible. It was time to be seen. A week later, the article dropped, a headline that hit harder than anything I could have imagined. Judge behind secret deportation, network linked to personal relationship with defendants. Spouse. My photo wasn't there, but my story was. The betrayal, the court date, the gavel, the smile, the money, the texts, all of it, laid bare for the world to see. The response was immediate. Social media lit up. Advocacy groups called for investigations. Former detainees reached out with similar stories. It wasn't just me. It had never been just me. I was just the first voice that refused to disappear. They moved me to another part of the facility for my safety. Not isolation, but something close to it. They said it was protocol. I didn't care. I had my books, my notes, my words. I had hope. That night, I stood by the narrow window in the new room. It was small, maybe 6 inches wide, but through it, I could see a strip of sky. And for the first time in months, I saw stars. If your truth has ever been ignored or buried because someone more powerful wanted it that way, leave a comment. Your story is not small, and your voice is not weak. Subscribe if you believe that justice starts with a whisper and ends with a roar, because this is where silence breaks. The day my wife was called to testify felt like an earthquake that had taken years to arrive. It was not just another legal step. It was a reckoning, a confrontation with everything she thought would remain hidden. And I felt it deep in my bones, even before the hearing began. The tension in the center was strange that morning. A quiet buzz in the hallway, a whisper among the guards. They all knew. The woman who had helped arrange my deportation, who had stood in the courtroom like a stranger as I was sentenced, would now have to face the very truth she tried to bury. She arrived alone. No lawyer beside her, at least not in the beginning. She looked smaller than I remembered, not in size, but in presence. Her confidence, that cold stillness she had worn like armor, had started to crack. I watched from the video monitor in a separate room, not allowed to attend in person. But every word she said reached me like thunder through glass. The prosecutor laid the foundation carefully. They didn't start with accusations. They started with facts, dates, travel records, financial statements. They pulled up the deposit of $10,000 that had entered her personal account the same week as my hearing. They showed the link between that account and a shared bank account tied to the judge's family trust. A coincidence? They asked. She said yes. Then came the text messages, the ones Diana had recovered. I'm stamped, raw, intimate. Lines like, "He won't make a fuss," and "We're almost there," and "Once the gavel drops, we're done." When asked what those messages meant, he hesitated. He tried to explain them away, said it was sarcasm, said they were jokes. Her voice cracked, her hands shook, and the room, I imagined, could feel it. The unraveling of a lie that had been stretched too far. Then came the emails, private exchanges between her and the judge. Some professional, some personal, some too personal. References to shared weekends, to decisions being taken care of. At one point, she was asked directly, "Were you involved in influencing the outcome of your husband's deportation hearing?" She didn't answer right away. Silence stretched like rope. Then she said, "I didn't know it would go that far." It was a confession disguised as an excuse, but it was enough. The courtroom remained still, but the weight of that sentence shook everything. My attorney later told me that the moment she admitted prior knowledge, everything shifted. The judge overseeing this ethics hearing paused the session, asked for a recess. When the session resumed, my wife's lawyer had arrived, red-faced, unprepared, and visibly furious. He asked for a postponement. It was denied. The ethics board continued. They turned to the judge himself next. He had been subpoenaed, but hadn't shown up in person. Instead, he submitted a written statement, cold, procedural, denying any wrongdoing, claiming no personal relationship with my wife. But the documents spoke louder than his absence, and the law finally listened. The board moved quickly. A suspension was issued pending further review. His cases were being audited, past rulings flagged, colleagues questioned. The empire he thought was untouchable had started to crack from the inside. As for my wife, her cooperation was demanded. She was given a choice: full cooperation with the investigation in exchange for immunity from criminal charges, or face prosecution for perjury, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. She chose to cooperate, and in doing so, exposed more than anyone expected. Other cases, other favors, other names, but that did not absolve her. Her actions had consequences. She lost her job, was evicted from the apartment we once shared. Friends turned away. Family questioned everything. And the final blow came in the form of a letter from Immigration Services. Her own residency, once sponsored by me, was under review. I watched it all from the inside, not with vengeance, not with joy, but with a strange, cold clarity. She had thrown me to the wolves, but in doing so, had wandered into the forest herself. And now, the silence she relied on had turned its back on her. I was granted the right to submit an updated petition for relief, a chance to reopen my immigration case based on fraud and judicial misconduct. My file was no longer a number on a desk. It was a headline, a case study, a symbol of what happens when power is abused and silence is broken. I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition. I wanted someone to say what happened to me was not just unlucky. It was illegal. It was cruel. It was wrong. And slowly, one hearing at a time, that recognition was coming. If you have ever waited for justice that felt like it would never come, I invite you to share your story in the comments. We are not just statistics. We are people. And if you are one of us, if you have felt the weight of silence pressing against your truth, subscribe, because here, your voice is the beginning of something bigger, something unstoppable. The morning sunlight filtered through the narrow window of my new room in the detention facility. It was not a room of comfort, but it was different. Not because of the walls or the bunk or the smell of antiseptic. It was different because the weight that had crushed me for months had begun to lift, just slightly. Like fog retreating from a morning field, I could breathe. I could see the edges of my life again. I was still far from freedom, but for the first time, freedom seemed possible. Not a distant dream, not a number or a document, but something I could feel in my chest, in my bones. I started planning my future with purpose. The attorney Diana and I worked tirelessly on the updated petition. Every transcript, every screenshot, every record of the judge's misconduct was carefully organized. My story, once just a whispered truth, had become a case that demanded attention. Not just attention from the court, attention from the public, from advocates, from people who had been silenced for too long. I realized that my struggle was never only about me. It was about all the voices that had been ignored, all the lives quietly dismantled by corruption and betrayal. When the motion was finally accepted, when the court officially recognized the misconduct and suspended the judge's authority pending review, I felt something I had not felt in years. Validation. My identity, my humanity, was being recognized, not as a number, not as a case file, not as a statistic, but as a man who had lived, who had worked, who had loved, and who had been betrayed, a man whose truth refused to be silenced. The months of uncertainty, fear, and betrayal had finally begun to transform into something stronger. Resilience. The world outside continued its routines. Life went on for others. But for me, every email, every phone call, every update from my attorney was a victory. I started rebuilding relationships, rebuilding trust, rebuilding the fragments of a life that had been threatened to be erased. Marco, my former employer, welcomed me back, offering not only work, but a reminder that not all who are powerful wish to destroy. And Diana continued to be a steadfast ally, showing me that courage comes in many forms, sometimes quietly, sometimes boldly, but always necessary. I began to imagine the life I wanted again. Not the same life as before, not naive, not blind. I dreamed of opening a small restaurant, a place filled with the smells of home, of memories, of tacos and mole and tortillas made by hands that had learned to survive, a place where I could share stories alongside meals, where every dish carried a piece of history, a piece of survival, a piece of truth. This dream, once hidden in a notebook, now felt real, and more importantly, it felt mine. I reflected on the lessons I had learned about trust, betrayal, about power, about resilience, and about myself. I understood that survival is not just avoiding harm. Survival is reclaiming your story. It is naming the injustice, facing the fear, and taking one step after another, even when the path is uncertain. It is living fully in the presence of those who tried to erase you. And in that, I found strength I never knew I had. Looking back now, I see the journey for what it truly was, a test of spirit, a revelation of character, a reminder that even in the corners there is light, that even when someone betrays you, the world can still hold allies who lift you back up, that even when systems fail, persistence and truth can create cracks wide enough to let justice in. My life had been broken, but it was not destroyed. I was still here. I had survived, and I was determined to thrive. To those watching this story, know this: no betrayal, no deception, no obstacle can fully erase the person you are. Your voice, your truth, your courage are yours to protect and to wield. And if my story resonates with you, if you have felt the weight of injustice or the sting of betrayal, leave your comment below. Speak your truth. Let it be known. And if you want to continue walking this journey with stories of survival, resilience, and the power of truth, click on the next video appearing on your screen. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing that stories like mine deserve to be told. Life will always present challenges, but in telling our stories, in sharing our truths, we reclaim a piece of our freedom and help others do the same. And that, more than anything, is worth holding on to.